It's the same thing, kind of the same rules of like music theory and stuff, where you have somebody that has no musical training and they're like, I refuse to learn music theory because I want to like really like,
I don't want to be forced into the rules.
Yeah, I don't want to be forced into the rules. I don't want to like have to follow rules. I'm doing my own unique thing, and they end up sounding just like anybody else. And it's like, how can you even know what like bounds to break? Well, what rules to break or what bounds to push in music if you don't already know what there already is? You're just following everybody else, but thinking that you're putting your own little spin on it.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, because they're really not inventing anything. They're just they're a slave of the modern conventions of the in vogue sound.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
Hello and welcome. This is episode 12 of GWNL-Podcast. I am Joe. We have
Bryant.
And
come on, bated breath.
And Ben.
Bated breath.
I didn't know
okay,
you were,
finally.
on my screen you pointed to me first.
I was well. You were not
Bryant.
there. This is confusing. I don't. Whatever. Like, point is, Ben, Bryant, and Joe.
This
we're all
thing
here.
doesn't always work.
You just ruined the intro. You just ruined the intro. Thank you for that. I just wanted you to know that. Well, today, wonderful.
The nice thing is, Joe. Now I'll interrupt you. Now we don't have to put something else from later in the podcast to the beginning, because our beginning
is already
pretty good.
Is already
ruined. It's just completely ruined, and you ruined everything. Like
okay,
including your mixes are always horrible. No, I'm kidding. So episode 12, art in mixing and art versus science in audio. This is kind of a hot topic, and I think we're going to cover some cool ground tonight. We all have some pretty strong opinions about this. Let's get started with bad mixing is not art, and pretending it is not helping you. Anybody want to take a shot at that? Just starting off.
First off, as far as bad mixing goes, there's some people that will say like, oh, it's a choice. Like, this is my personal choice, my flavor and such. Because a lot of audio is subjective, but there's things that are not subjective. Like you can objectively quantify when something sounds good and when something sounds bad, but you can't always necessarily explain. I don't think you can always explain why it sounds good or bad. But as far as that goes, some people will make decisions. Well, everybody's making decisions that are informed based off of their monitoring capabilities. If you listen to like that really popular Paramore song that I can't remember.
Are you talking the one that like Good For You that is based off?
No,
of
no,
that
the one. No, not that one. It was more recent. Ain't It Fun? If you listen to Ain't It Fun on like some really, really good speakers like ATCs, you'll hear just how bad of a mix it is. Huh. Like it's a really, really bad mix. Sorry to whoever mixed that. It was bad, but
now the comment section is going to be like, "You're an idiot. You don't know anything, Brian. You're the worst mix engineer ever."
I'm not that good of a mix engineer, so I probably shouldn't be saying that kind of stuff. But that was not informed on. You can't hear what you can't hear, and so in order to make sure you're not mixing poorly, you need to make sure that you have a decent mixing environment.
Well, I would add. Yeah, Ben.
I was just saying that's tough to like judge them from ATCs, because ATCs really show the mid-range.
Everything.
Yeah.
So like they're designed to do that. That's why they're good.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, Joe. What were you saying?
No, I was just going to say, so like I think here's a good way of this is a good way. As a live sound engineer, you kind of realize that there are certain things that are just not good practice. Playing speakers in an auditorium generally can be done, but you have to do it the right way, because the art is this sounds good, this doesn't sound good. Like there were things like distortion that was created because from actually like overdriving things. That's where you get the term overdrive. So they overdrove those things which caused distortion, right? And those were things that they did on purpose that are considered bad for the electronics. Now, some people would have probably looked at that back then and been like, wow, that sounds horrible. This is a bad idea. You're overdriving this and it sounds bad. But other people were able to objectively look at that and say, oh, wow, That overdriven sound gives it these sonic qualities. Those sonic qualities are valuable in the mixing environment. I can do this with that. I can bring down the volume. I can do these things, right? So understanding those technical limitations and those things is, as I shake my computer, understanding those things is not subjective. That is an objective. That is science. That is mathematics. Knowing how sound propagates, understanding that sound sounds better or sound changes as it goes through the air and as it goes through certain mediums. That is science. That is knowledge based. That is not going to change because you want it to or because you think this. That is where you get your techniques from. But things like, oh, I like the sound of overdrive, that is different. That is a subjective thing. Some people don't like it. Some people, I don't know very many people that don't like overdriven. But the point is there are certain situations where you can do those things. And it's understanding the science of how to do and accomplish those things, the experience of knowing when to use those things, and the knowledge to know that you're not going to overdrive a violin and people are going to think that that's really cool sounding because that doesn't sound cool.
Well, I think that takes us to what we really should have started with.
Lame.
Which is
Yes.
like what the difference between art and science is, especially in mixing. Because a lot of times,
And I was trying to get at that. Like,
yeah, and that's what I said. You took us to that point. A lot of times, people are like, how is there any art in mixing? Because it's a technical thing. But like everything technical has an aspect of art to it. And
Right.
it's that concept of breaking some rules. So you can just do everything perfectly. So there's rules of mixing, right? The first and foremost rule of mixing is that everything must be audible.
Sine chained. It should be sine chained. Everything should be side chain compressed. That's the first rule. Sorry, what were you saying, Ben? I'm sorry.
But there's there's like 5 rules. Everything must be audible. There must be like a nice representation of frequencies. There should be like things should be dynamically controlled. Things aren't way too loud or way too soft to be making you jump out of your seat. There should be a nice like panoramic kind of spatial width. And then the fifth, well, no, I guess there's panoramic width and depth too. So there's depth of your mix. And then the last one is excitement. Or maybe there's 6 because it's excitement is break rules 1 through 5.
Do you even know these rules? I feel like just making them up on the
I
spot.
write them on the board for the students and I move things around every time.
Okay, whatever.
But anyways, the point is that if you just follow all those rules to a T, you can end up with a very sterile sounding mix. So if we just think of the first one, that everything must be clear. So like you make everything clear and that's great, but actually breaking that rule a little bit for a purpose could like, if things like fight a little bit, it could bring the listener's ear into that fighting,
Right.
If something's fighting so much that it just covers it up sometimes and it's like, what happened to the hi-hat? Oh, it just disappeared because the acoustic guitar inhabits the same frequencies. Then that's bad mixing. But if they kind of like overlap together a little bit and it creates this like cool groove of the hi-hat and the acoustic guitar almost sounding like one thing, then you've just gotten into artistic mixing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think for the most part, it's understanding how those things interact. And they're not always going to interact well, and understanding how they interact and cause changes in balance, clarity, perception, width, effects, all of that stuff. And being able to cognitively manage those things. You're not all like we don't live in this audio. I don't think is this perfect world where you get everything that you want, as much as some customers might want to think that it is. It is not that way.
You can't always get what you want.
Oh
Don't you
my
ever
gosh.
quote that to me ever again. That's like libelous at this point. I don't even know. I'd use that term incorrectly. I don't care.
Yeah.
But no, But I mean, this kind of leads us into the second topic, which is you need to learn the rules before you can break them. It's not just about like, oh, well, it's really artistic. And I was like, well, your articism is called peaking, and it's the entire track. So maybe you just suck. Like,
Well,
I don't know.
It's the same thing, kind of the same rules of like music theory and stuff, where you have somebody that has no musical training and they're like, I refuse to learn music theory because I want to I want to like really like.
I don't want to be forced into the rules.
Yeah, I don't want to be forced into rules. I don't want to like have to follow rules. I'm doing my own unique thing, and they end up sounding just like anybody else. And it's like, how can you even know what like bounds to break? Well, what rules to break or what bounds to push in music if you don't already know what there already is? You're just following everybody else, but thinking that you're putting your own little spin on it.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, because they're really not inventing anything. They're a slave of the modern conventions, of the in vogue sound.
Yeah, it's true. You have to know what technology is out there before you can invent something new. Or else you might spend all this time trying to invent the breakthrough toaster,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, they already have a toaster. Dang it. My breakthrough.
Well, I mean,
I think of the different types, like to kind of like bring it back to like audio related things. I think about like the different types of
toaster?
compressors.
You didn't want to talk about toasters?
I like toasters.
And I like toasters. I like toast. But as far as like compression goes, before I like learned about the different types of hardware compressors, I was just using a compressor to compress things, and I didn't really know what I was reaching for, and I didn't really understand kind of like the difference between an 1176 and LA2A or DBX 160. I didn't really understand what made them special, but then once I did some research and learned on them, I was like, oh, I can like actually use these how instead of just like imitating the professionals and using them the same way they use them, I was like, oh, this is why like CLA reaches for an 1176 on his drums. This is why so and so reaches towards this other compressor for a bass, or et cetera, et cetera. And it like kind of learning about those things really broadened my horizons and broadened like kind of like my painting palette in a way.
So I want to bring up something that I think is interesting from what you were saying. I think in a lot of respects, I was listening to this podcast, essentially. It's like mixing tips from this guy called, it's a YouTube channel called Mixing with Mike.
You're cheating on us? You're
I don't
listening to
care.
somebody else?
Yeah, I don't
Gotta stay
just
informed.
listen to you. I don't care. Yeah, you have to know what the enemy's doing. No, no, I'm kidding. So Mixing with Michael White has been mixing for a lot of years. I think like 3 or 4 decades, like a lot of experience and major acts. And he was actually talking about how when he first started, he was basically writing down notes. This is back in like the 60s, 70s, 80s. I can't remember exactly. Don't quote me on this. But when he was writing down notes for the second engineer, and he talked about how he would write out exactly all of the settings for every compressor. Like, because back then they didn't just come in and the DAW remembered everything.
Yeah,
you had to
recall.
manually set.
Yeah.
Like, oh, exactly
You
at
have to write
this.
it all down. Yeah.
Right. And so he was the guy who wrote all of that down. And so he went through, he wrote all that stuff down, and he did this for like months, I think years possibly at the time. I don't know exactly, so don't quote me. But he said that what was important was not the settings. It was not the compressor settings. It wasn't ratios. It wasn't any of that. It was the decisions behind what drove those settings. It's not, oh, I always use, a ratio of 4:1 on my kick drum. Like, that's not the important thing that you get from that. It's knowing when to use that ratio, that attack, that release. Because we as musicians are more dynamic and varied. And sometimes you're not going to have as many problems with the track. And so, like, you can kind of flex your artistic muscles a little bit more versus other times where you have to work more to kind of make the song sing because it's either not tracked properly, it's a live show, whatever. But
The arrangement.
I think it was very interesting. It wasn't the settings, it wasn't the compressors, it was why they used those things, and that's important.
Those are all tools to get you to the end result. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, building something and a carpenter using a chisel or something.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I always have to use this chisel when I'm creating, this piece of furniture or something like that. And maybe if you use a different kind of wood, you'd use a different chisel, or if you're trying to do a different thing, And so it's all about just the tool, and that's what the all those settings on compressors and stuff, they're all a tool to achieve the goal of what you want to hear on that track.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we're getting at with like bad mixing versus art. It's like making and I would go with that. Making uninformed or unintended. Now that being making uninformed decisions is not artistic necessarily. There are things like happy accidents where you do something and oh wow, that actually sounds good. And like you'll hear people talking about like microphone shootouts where they have vocalists that are like they have them on a U87 that's been modded that is like well over $20,000 or like a U67 or something. And then they put him on an SM57. They're like, wow, he sounds way better on an SM57.
Yeah.
I mean,
and sometimes that's the case. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't need to spend $1 million to necessarily sound good.
Good. Yeah.
Especially today.
And it's not always going to be the most expensive microphone.
Right.
That makes somebody sound the best.
A lot of it has more to do with what everything else is going on. And I think we've talked about this in other podcasts, so I don't want to belabor that point. But yeah.
But that's we've talked a lot about, where people make stuff sound bad and they use that as an excuse for
I'm
it's
artistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the other side, the opposite side is a good one to talk about, where a lot of times people do too good of a job at following all the rules of mixing and then create something that's sterile and lifeless. So I've heard way too many mixes like this where, and I was talking to Joe about this before the podcast, that like years ago when I was first coming up in audio, I was checking out studios and stuff, and they'd all give you your little demo reel. Back then it was like you had to get a CD from them. And I would listen to those, and I was like, this sounds good, but it doesn't sound great. Like everything I could hear, every instrument and stuff, but it was just kind of sterile and lifeless. And especially when you compare it to like professional stuff, I was like, okay, there's a reason why they're a regional, like a local studio versus like a national professional studio, because, what they did, it sounded good, sounded clear, but there just wasn't any excitement to it. And that excitement comes from breaking some of the rules. And that's why, mixers are sought after. If everybody just mixed to that sterile, lifeless point, then there'd be a whole bunch of people out there that could achieve that for you. But there's a reason why people are paid more to be those great mixers. It's the art that they put into it, and those imperfections. And it's the same thing as like playing piano. You can play piano perfectly on the beat and stuff, and it can be lifeless. But if you ebb and flow with it, you get a little too loud or too soft here, you drive the emotions, then you get that art. And it's the same thing with the mixing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So
art evokes
emotion.
Not for me anymore. I honestly no, I'm kind of serious. Like it's hard for me to care about. That's so bad. I can't
do
say
you need
that
therapy?
Like, maybe I do. Like I kind of like I've had a lot of really bad negative experiences in audio that like have kind of driven away my love for it. It's just work for me, which is why I can do it. Like I can just kind of like whatever. Nobody likes my mixes anyway, so why should I? Like like I really struggle to feel something when I listen to music. To me, I hate to say it, I fall into that camp of being far too clinical about the way that I do things. I don't really get excited. I don't personally emote with music as much anymore. It's hard for me to do that because it's kind of died for me. So for the rest of the world who can still feel, power to you. My heart is black as coal.
Okay.
Oh, the thing that I thought of, and it can tie into this. I can make it tie into this, or I'll try. It goes back to like one of the rules that we were talking about of mixing, where one of the rules is like make sure you can hear everything. I was listening to Warren Hewart on Produce Like a Pro. He talks about sterile mixes as well. He's like one of the big issues with sterile mixes is that you can hear everything all the time. He's like there's moments where you do need to hear everything in the mix, but if you hear everything throughout the whole song, it feels sterile. There's nothing catching your attention. So to have, a guitar come in and all of a sudden be louder than, the drums or the bass, and then have that kind of like ebb and flow in and out, kind of like the piano thing, that helps to negate a sterile mix, that helps to bring life to it, that helps to evoke emotion in it as well, that brings feel.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Okay.
Oh, he's got a
So
smirk.
if you're mixing, right, and you're looking to, for you as a mixer, your personal opinion, and you're looking to inject some life into your mix, where do you usually look to see, like, to find something to inject some life into that? If you
Sidechain compression.
Oh, perfect. Ben's favorite, obviously.
I should have just cranked my preamp there.
Sidechain compression.
Oh goodness.
Sidechain compression.
That's awesome.
Yeah. No, like honestly though, like where do you look for to find that kind of excitement, or like to inject that in?
I think the first thing I look for is how can I use either like pumping with compression or like delay that's on the beat to actually make it, give it some bounce or give it some
Like motion?
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, that's the first place to go for heightening the emotion is like with like groove and percussion. So it's like, what can you do to add to the groove that's already happening to make the groove more exciting? And a lot of times that is like doing a little bit more compression. One of the most common things for me is like you take a hi-hat that's like an 8th note hi-hat and you put a 16th note delay on it. And now all of a sudden, maybe it's just subtle, but it's like kind of more hype because all of a sudden you went like almost double time with the hi-hat, So things like that, that's the first thing.
Yeah.
And then after that, I would say the example that Brian gave about bringing something in that's a little too loud. So you'd like make people, I mean, what happens when you're at a show and something comes in too loud? You jump back. It creates a physical and emotional response. It's like, whoa.
I mean, I run up to the stage and I punch him in the face, but everybody handles it differently.
I mean, it's like the equivalent of like a jump scare in a movie,
Yeah.
Like that's what you're doing essentially.
Oh yeah, and I mean, like you see the audience like, oh, like you see them all like, it's really kind of funny actually.
So you're driving a physical and an emotional response from something you just visually showed them in the movie.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you're driving for.
And it really depends, on song to song. Like when I was mixing an album that was like an acoustic singer-songwriter type album, there was one song that was just, this particular song had just like an acoustic guitar and a vocal, and it was a single vocal. It was the only one on the record that did just that, those two. And he wanted it to feel bigger than it actually was. And so in an effort to do that, I ended up doing some like interesting processing on the guitar in parallel to add some ambience to make it sound bigger, and it actually kind of created like this artificial instrument there, and it really added to the emotion of it. The artist was really, really happy with what I did there, and he was like, oh my gosh, that's like a cool thing. And it got a good emotional response from him too, because he was like, oh, I never even thought of like that kind of a thing. And that's kind of like the art side of mixing there. Use something a little bit less traditional to create kind of an artificial instrument in there.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that it comes down to a lot of times is it is like doing something crazy that you wouldn't expect, to do it. So there's
but in a manner that's not like out of character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
If you think of some of these like
really
techniques, some of these can be like advanced techniques that you shouldn't go to them as like a first resort. These are like kind of icing on the cake type of a thing.
Well, I mean, like in this instance, we're talking about addressing a stale or static mix, and we're trying to excite that mix. So, like in this instance, we've looked at it and we said, you've already done the right like basics. You're balanced. There's all this other stuff. It's there. It's just not interesting.
Yeah.
And I did have an experience with a student who just graduated.
Lame.
I can't say anything today.
That's because you're lame.
Old and lame. But yeah, like last semester actually, and he was, finishing up his portfolio, and he was doing this song, and it was, this artist that he recorded and that he produced it and done all the engineering, and he played it for me, and it was like, it sounded really good, but it was exactly that sterile kind of mix thing. And that's what I told him. And I said, you've done a really good job mixing this. It's like, now you need to go and take it and like break some rules. And it was cool because he went out and he's like, okay. And then he went and did it. And it's like super cool. Like the song is like really, it's the best song on the album that this girl did. And he, the producer, it made it like jump out and like be really exciting by adjusting, a lot of it was like making stuff come in too loud or too soft and maybe fight with each other a little bit, but it made a huge difference. Like it'd be something where we could easily like play the before and after and hear like a big difference.
Major difference. So not that anybody's asked, but I would probably look to Rhythmic Elements if there are any Rhythmic Elements to inject some
Joe,
life
what would
into
you
it.
do?
Thanks for asking, Ben. I would look for Rhythmic Elements. No, I think the reason why is there are two things that I look at when I'm trying to inject life into it. Is one, dynamics. I go to percussion and dynamics because I feel like those are the things that we emote with, like crescendos, things like the drums being punchy in like a rock tune. But even then, like for things like string instruments and like string quartets, you're looking at things like their dynamics, they're growing and they're the ebb and the flow, and that's kind of dynamic, really. And so, yeah, I would say I start kind of looking at those dynamic qualities of that piece and seeing how I can like super like magnify those things. The other thing that I think I do is I actually try to pull back. Well, and this also depends on the tracks that you get. I try to pull back if I have good tracks on the plugins that I'm using. I try not to use as, and I mean, I've just in general tried not to use as much anymore. But I think when we endeavor to use too much processing, it stops becoming a song, and it starts becoming just processing. And I think as I have like gained some understanding, gosh, I've been doing this for 7 years now. Seems like I've only been doing it for a year. But as I have kind of worked through things, I have noticed that we have to learn to understand, and I'm going to wax jazz poetic for a second here. We need to understand the vibe of the track. We need to understand the vibe of what's going on to really understand what it needs to make it unsterile, because I feel like a lot of times we get that over clean mix from not actually understanding the vibe of the song. Like I was talking to Ben about a track. I had him listen to one before, and I was talking to him about like some of the difficulties that were a part of that and how I didn't want to ruin those difficulties. I didn't want to ruin the harmonics and the performance of that whole thing because it's a very percussive song. And I didn't want to overcompress things because if I overcompressed it, it would get rid of that dynamic life from like all of these rhythmic instruments as well as the lead parts. And so I was very critical of how I used compression. It wasn't that I didn't use a lot of compression. It wasn't even that I used a lot of techniques like that. It was just that I had to be very cognizant of how I used those tools because I didn't want to remove the life that was already there from the performers and from their performance of it. And I understood that from all of the different rhythmic elements. And so I think understanding that vibe as well as the other things that I said are good ways of injecting life into your music and listening, references. Like, I don't think we talk about that enough, but I've started to use references a lot more. Like, I try to find some music that sounds similar to it, genre, style, performance, recording, all of that stuff. And then I listen to 2 or 3 of them. And then I say, wow, why does mine suck? And then I answer that question.
It's true. I mean, like if your mix is all lifeless and sterile, and then you listen to a reference track and it's not lifeless and sterile, you're like, what's different? You know?
That's a good case study.
Yeah. But I think this really is getting to the serving the song thing is to make sure that the emotional feel that you're emoting is the same one that like the lyrics and the song is trying to emote, you know?
Yeah.
So if your song is like really somber and stuff, you're like, I'm going to sidechain the drums so that it's it pumps you up.
Yeah, and then you have
like,
this like
that's like some of the remixes of like slow songs. You're like,
yeah.
You're like, what the heck?
Joe,
Yeah, but I love that phrase, you know, serve the song. Every move you do, whether you're in the songwriting phase, the, you know, arrangement phase, the tracking phase, mixing, mastering, it all needs to serve the song. And you may be thinking like, how can you serve the song while you're still like writing it? And it's like, well, part of writing it is making sure that you're picking, you know, the words to invoke the emotion that you're trying to do, that you're trying to,
or the composition to evoke the emotion. Because how often do you paint yourself into a corner because you don't compose it the right way, and now the mix sounds bad no matter what you do? Sorry, that's a sore spot.
It's true. All of it adds to it, like the actual writing of the song, the performance of the artist, the producing of it, you know, deciding like the production and the arrangement of it, and then the mixing, and then even the mastering. Yeah. Like the mastering is another artistic step.
Yo, have you ever watched like mastering engineers talk about their craft? They like,
oh yeah,
it is very like, I kind of like it because it's like very zen, and some of them are very like zen about it. They're like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I did like a half dB boost at
I know, and it's like, and like he's just got like 2 knobs.
1K.
Like he's got like 2 knobs on his desk.
Check out this like Mag EQ when I enable this 40K band. Just like, check this out. Do you hear that?
Pops.
You're like,
pops.
that's above the audible range of human hearing. How are you hearing anything?
Like, that's not how that works. That is literally out of your.
I like
human
the
hearing.
soft, gentle voice that Brian went to on. Okay, so that's exactly true.
on today's episode of ASMR, Mastering ASMR.
Hey,
Put that down in the comment section if you want us to do some mastering ASMR. Just
but it's true though. I mean, yeah, some of those guys, I love them, but yeah, they do.
I mean, I
they do
respect
take
that.
it seriously, and it's true.
Oh,
it is.
yeah.
It's a serious step, and you know, I'll mix and master things for people, but. And I know a lot of studios and engineers don't do this, where they're like, oh yeah, sure, I can master it too. I always prefer to say, if I mix it, go send it off somewhere else for mastering, so that somebody else gets a, you know, their art on it, and they can add to the art that I do. Because if I master it, I'm going to just do more of the same artistic touch that I've already been doing, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's very good to inject more life. Yeah, inject more life in by having somebody else mess with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like I was the first song I ever mastered was actually that I like got a paying client for. She reached out and was like, "Hey, do you master music?" And I was like, Yes, I do. And
that yes thing rears its head.
She ended up sending me the mix that she had. And she had somebody else mix it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this sounds like the whole thing was just like recorded with a blanket." You know, there was like, and so like I had to do like some pretty crazy moves that most mastering engineers would probably be like, "Yeah, dude, you don't know what you're doing." But according to my ears, I did like an A/B test on them, and I was like, "Holy crap!" Like this, like my master just brought so much life to that mix, and you know, really brought some more clarity and helped it translate better across multiple systems too.
I would say if you have a really good set of tracks, that art, you can do art. You as a mix engineer should be able to do art with good recorded tracks. But the less good the recording is, the less good those things are, the more problems you're going to have to address. And you can't be like, I run into this thing in live all the time because I'll tell people things and then they're like, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll give me whatever reason is not right. And obviously it's not right because I'm the engineer. But no, it's one of these things where like I was like, they're painting themselves into a box and they're making my life more difficult. And yeah, you as an engineer should be able to handle those things. Don't take it as, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. But like sometimes you need to give yourself a little bit of a break as you're mixing these things, because if you're given trash and you make it look respectable and not like trash, that's good. You can't always expect to get amazing tracks to mix with. And especially for live engineers who do stuff in the studio, there are some live stuff, especially if you're dealing with amateur musicians. Don't expect good stuff. And like, I remember I was working at a festival with a good friend of mine, and I was mixing all day. You have to realize I've been mixing for 6 or 7 hours, different ensembles. I even had Ben performing on the stage, and you don't know how hard it is to mix that guy. Gosh. Come on, dude, turn down, please. Anyways, no, but I was mixing all day, and I was running this festival, and then next thing I know, this professional ensemble comes with their own mix engineer, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna maybe learn some things and watch. I was sitting there and I was listening, and I heard him go through sound check, and already through sound check, he sounded so much better. Their whole ensemble sounded better than anything I had done the whole day, and I was like, I suck. I absolutely suck. I am horrible at everything that I do. He's using the exact same tools I'm using, yet his mix, his whole sound sounds way better in this environment, and it was one of these things where I just kind of sat there and I was like, gosh dang, why do I work so hard at this? I just suck, you know? And then I thought about it later, and my buddy, you all know him, JD, he's a good guy. And he said to me, he's like, look, man, like this engineer tours with these people. He only works with this band. He might do some other side gigs, obviously, but like, you know what I mean? He can dial this stuff in. He just shows up with his show file, puts it in there, you know, and obviously I should have thought about that myself, but like there are a lot of times where we beat ourselves up about that because he doesn't have as many problems to fight because he's probably clarified those with his ensemble and like explained those things out to them so that they understand and they don't cause those things. Whereas me, I had random people coming on the stage. A lot of them were amateurs and had no idea even how to like position themselves in front of a mic to get a good sound. Mm-hmm. And so you got to kind of give yourself a little bit of a break when you're not really mixing art and you just kind of end up mixing what you get.
Technical science.
Yeah.
Yeah, the art is it's really the icing on the cake. If you don't have the basic stuff happening, and it's true, if your source material, whether it's your musicians or your song or your production, are lackluster, then you're only going to be able to get it to like the science technical level, and it's like really hard to get the art happening.
And then your production manager's like, why does that sound so bad? I'm like, gosh. It's like, whatever.
Okay.
Anyway.
So we should wrap up.
I'm just bitter.
Mix good.
Yeah.
Don't mix bad. Mix good.
Learn the rules and then break them.
Learn the rules, then burn the rules.
Mix Zen.
No. Mix good. Say it, Ben. Say it with me now. Mix good. It's not artistic.
Yeah, it's you're gonna mix Zen. You're gonna be artistic.
No.
You must be one
ruined
with the
that.
mix.
No.
You must be one with
I
the
am
mix.
the mix and the mixes with me. I am the mix that mixes with me. I am the mix that mixes with me.
Okay,
Put in the comments
mix
section
good.
what that's from. Mix
Okay.
good. There we go.
Mix good. There you go. You happy now?
Okay.
Yes, that's our freaking catchphrase, guy.
Is that bad to do to a preamp?
No, it's totally awesome.
Continually just overdrive
If
it.
they're not designed for this, then why use them? I have all the
Exactly.
dial, right? I pay for it.